Good afternoon, boys and girls, mommies and daddies, and grandmommies and grandpappies. This is an awesome day. As you know, we are going to name the little bad wolf. And you know, grandmommy has called him the little bad wolf now for something like maybe 38 years, 37 years. That's what I've always referred him to as Piggly, Wiggly, and Squiggly, and their best friend, the little bad wolf. It's going to be hard to get used to calling him that, and we don't know yet if he's going to, excuse me, if he's going to go by that, or is he going to go by his new name. We haven't an idea yet. But I tell you, well, there goes one of my notes. I had to make some notes because for you newer listeners, or for any of you because you haven't heard too much of the backstory, this is the third revision of this original part of the story. When my granddaughter that I had developed these for was, young, 4 years old or something, we were telling these stories, and she said, "Well, Grandmommy, what is the little bad wolf's name?" And I quickly thought to myself, don't know his name, and developed a story about we will name the little bad wolf. And so each time that I told it, which was maybe 30 years later, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. I wrote it in a little book. And so then that was the second time. So then the third revision was about 30 years later, and he had a different name again because, I don't always say the same thing twice. So this is the fourth revision. And I was thinking it was only the third, but it is the fourth revision. This one, because we are live on air and we're also in a more progressive environment than what we were 40 years ago, is changed a little bit. The boys have their own cell phones because Mommy Piggy wants to have them protected and to be able to call her anytime. And so, 40 years ago, kids didn't have their own cell phones. And so, it's a different time, and so you have to adapt your stories to the different times. Let me drink this water real quick. So, with that being said, excuse me if I look down here for my notes that I wrote. I am sitting here along with Mrs. Piggy and with Mrs. Farmer Brown. We are kind of up on a little grandstand affair. And right behind us is the steps and is the tables where the food will be laid out. Actually, there are some nibblings down there now with the little paper plates. This town is going to be a mess when it's over with. There's going to be paper plates and paper cups and napkins all over the yard, all over the street, everything. So Mr. Farmer Brown, being the good guy that he is, he told the boys, he told Allie and Little Bad Wolf and the three little pigs, because they're the biggest of the boys, and he says, "Okay, boys," he says, "I'm going to need your help cleaning the town up after the party is over with." Well, the merchants heard him say that, and they said, "We will do our share too." All the merchants picked up the trash with the boys after the party was over. It was, well, I haven't seen it yet, but that's what they said they were going to do, Actually, I'm looking in the camera what you're seeing, and I'm surprised that I haven't really introduced an elephant in the woods. I haven't figured out how to do that. How did the elephant get from the jungle into the woods? But as you see, that is just a mere piece of my elephant collection. Those of you that know that I really, truly think elephants are the greatest of all animals. They're so smart, and they teach and they take care of their babies and of their other siblings. With that being said, again, I'm on a roll today. You'll have to excuse me. There's been some things that's happened this morning that wow, I took care of. Let's put it that way. It would have been interesting if I had not taken care of them. That's all I can say. So, as I said, I am sitting up here with Mrs. Farmer Brown and Miss Mommy Piggy, and they have said that we're going to go down in a little while and start cutting the cakes. And oh, the cakes are so pretty. She bought 5. I thought she only bought 3. She bought 5 sheet cakes. Now, you all know what a sheet cake is. I know the boys and girls do too. It's that big, long, flat cake that you get from the bakery. Oh, they outdid themselves. They outdid themselves. Publix has got such a nice bakery, and they drew the little bad wolf on these cakes. Can you imagine that? They drew his little, oh my gosh, he looks so cute. One cake has got a big bushy tail and his feet. Now that's really cute. The other cake in the middle has got him in his overalls from his neck down to his knees. They even put little Sadie Skunk's face in the pocket of his overalls. Oh my gosh. I tell you, Mrs. Farmer Brown, she knows how to fix up a party. Well, of course, the third cake has got his head with these big bushy eyes and his ears and everything. They're such precious cakes, such precious cakes. So, last week, unknown to me, right beside the drugstore is Hartley's Hardware. Well, Mr. Hartley had a real good idea. He said, he went out to talk to Mr. Farmer Brown, and he said, Mr. Farmer Brown, I don't mean to horn in on the Little Bad Wolf's party, but I was just thinking of something. How about if we draw everybody's ticket in that big, huge basket? It's going to take 2 days. Not really, I hope, anyway. And I will give them their choice of anything in the store that cost under $100. My heavens above. Do you know what that means, boys and girls? That means any one of the tools, like a hoe, a rake, I don't know the tools, a hammer and saw, and all the tools like that, somebody could walk in and pick their choice and get it for free, and I'd have to pay for it because it was a present from Mr. Hartley himself. Hi. And then he even had these pretty, pretty vases, and he had some little statues and some little bowls and dishes, and they were all a pottery called Hull, Hull, and oh my gosh, the women were they were so anxious. That's what they were wanting to get. So Mr. Farmer Brown says, well, now, that would be kind of interesting. He said, so when would we pick out the names for Little Bad Wolf? And they got to thinking, and Mr. Hartley says, well, how about for every 10 names we pull out, because they had to write their names on the back. They wrote on the front of the paper. Mr. Farmer Brown had fixed it where you would write the name that you chose for Little Bad Wolf, but you had to turn it over and you had to write your name, because if your name was picked, he wanted to tell you personally, thank you. So Mr. Hartley said, how would it be if we did every 10 names goes to the hardware, and then if the 11th name, and Mrs. Piggy is real good about taking records, so she could probably take records for us. And Mr. Farmer Brown says, yes, she's real good about that. He says, my wife's going to be busy cutting the cake and everything and getting the food ready. And Mr. Hartley says, yes, I understand that. He said, so let's have Miss Piggy take hash marks, and when we come to number 11 and number 21, and so forth and so on, every 10 names, then we'll take that next name and we'll put it in a... He says, you know what I have in the hardware store? He says, I have one of these little barrels just like you've got. He says, but it's half that size. He says, it's not even a quarter of that size. He says, I bet you right now, he said, all the names that we would pick would be in that bucket, would fit real good. And he says, then you could do it all over again. He says, wouldn't that be a surprise to everybody? And Mr. Farmer Brown starts laughing. He said, the biggest surprise would be for Little Bad Wolf. He's kind of nervous today, or, this week about having his name, and he doesn't know if he wants to do this. He wants to do this, but he doesn't want to do this. And he says, Mrs. Farmer Brown and I, he says, we have cried over this. We have laughed over this. And he says, we have tried to encourage Little Bad Wolf to, go along with this. And we told him that if he didn't like the names that he picked out of the bucket, well, then he didn't have to use them except for special legal times. And we can still call him Little Bad Wolf, or we can call him LBW. And I kind of like LBW. It sounds real southern and sounds real good. LBW. Hey, here comes LBW down the street. Look at that new car LBW is driving today. See how it fits? It fits real good, doesn't it? Well, so Mr. Farmer Brown finally told Mrs. Farmer Brown what him and Mr. Hartley had done. Oh, dear. She goes, ay, 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 ay. So, today is the day, as we said. And Little Bad Wolf, oh, bless his heart, he's so nervous. He combed his hair down, and then it didn't look right, so he messed it all up again, and he combed it down again. And Mrs. Farmer Brown came by the bathroom door, and she says, Little Bad Wolf, she says, just leave your hair alone. She says, it looks cute standing up on end. She says, that looks like you. But, Mrs. Farmer Brown, Mama, I wanted to try to look nice today. And she says, you look very nice and very handsome today, Little Bad Wolf. That's the new shirt that I bought you the other day, and it matches Mr. Farmer Brown's shirt that he's going to wear today. And you got the same color of jeans on. You both got your jeans on, your boots on, and the pretty new shirt I got you. She says, you couldn't look any more handsome. Well, with that, Little Bad Wolf looks in the mirror, and he goes like this. So, now the crowd starts to come. And you remember now, they have this little pavilion next door to the drugstore, and then on the other side is the Hartley hardware store. So across the street's the grocery store. So all you had to do was to come that morning to town, get your groceries, and park your car, put them in the car, and park your car. Of course, if you had anything cold, you had to go take it home, come back. And you spent the whole day there. It was really nice. It was just a good old-fashioned fun day in a little town. So Mr. Farmer Brown gets up and he takes the microphone and he says, well, boys and girls and mommies and daddies and grandmommies and grandpuppies. And I thought to myself, he stole my speech. That's what I say. And he kind of turned around and he looked at me kind of funny. Well, he said, I want to thank everybody for coming today. He said, it's going to be a fun day. He says, we've got all the food over here. And he pointed over to where Mrs. Farmer Brown was standing and she was cutting the cake. And he said, we got plenty of food now. He says, and right over there beside the grocery store, he said, there is a great big slide for the boys and girls, and there's also the little thing that's got the balls in it and that you jump into. He didn't know what they were called because Little Bad Wolf was too big to do that, and so he didn't know what they were called. I don't know what they're called. You know what they're called. The big thing that the kids jump into with balls. And he said, I have a surprise for everybody. He said, as you folks know, because your kids have been there often enough, he said, we have a skating rink out to my farm. And all the boys and girls are jumping up and down. Yay, 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 we can't wait to go skating, can't wait, can't wait. And he says, well, tonight, boys and girls, he says, the skating rink is closed because we're going to be here. He says, we don't know how long this is going to take. He says, look at all those papers in that rolling bucket. He says, we're going to be here for quite a while. Oh, they all groaned. Actually, GrandMommy's thinking that we may have to finish this up tomorrow. So, anyway, he says, so I have also, he says, he said that I have fixed the floors of that skating rink. He says to turn over for a very smooth dance floor. And all the grown-ups said, oh, yes, Mr. Farmer Brown, we just love your dances out there. And, in the corner, he built a bowling alley of what was it, 2 lanes or 3 lanes, I think it was. It has to be either 2 or 4, doesn't it? So 4 lanes he built. And he said, we're going to start having every Saturday, was it every other Saturday? Don't remember, I'd have to look it up. We're going to start having square dances. Now, we don't do the square dances like a lot of people do. A lot of people will take 8 people, 2 and 2 and 2 and 2. And they do their dance. And these 4 couples here, they do their dance. And da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da-da. He said, what we're going to do, he says, we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. He says, we're going to get in one great big circle. And he says, and then I'm going to go around and I'm going to say 1. And then the next couple, 2. And so all the odd numbers get over here. And they don't get over there. You just form a circle. Odd, even, odd, even, odd, even, odd, even. And then when I call out the dances, all the odd numbers do the first one, and all the even numbers do the second one. Well, some of the parents, they had been dancing that way when they were younger, and they thought that was a real good idea. So he says, the purpose of my announcing this, he says, is that I have some live talent for you folks. He said, I knew their father and their mother, and their name is Billy Ed and Hilda, and they are brother and sister. And he says, if you look over there, he said, you can hear the fiddle playing right now. He said, Billy Ed plays the fiddle, and he said, Hilda, she plays the guitar, and they don't need a drum, they don't need any sound system, they don't need anybody else playing because they're that good. And oh, lordy, 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 boys and girls, GrandMommy heard those kids play, and they are really good. Now, they are, I think, about the 10th and 12th grade, or maybe it's the 11th grade, and Billy Ed's already graduated from high school. They're very young. So he says, with that, he said, you can go over there and listen to the music. I put some chairs out. He says, you can go over there and dance. He says, I put a little dance floor over there. He said, I just want everybody to have a real good time today. We're going to have an old-fashioned fun day, like our grandpas and our grandmas did when the town was little. The town is still little, but people have changed. He says, so I want to go back to the old-fashioned way for just one day at least. Well, everybody was laughing and saying that was a great idea. And then somebody said, hey, Mr. Farmer Brown. And he looked out into the audience, and I'm looking back, and I can't see who's back there hollering at him, but Mr. Farmer Brown apparently did, because he said, yeah, Bob, what you want? Well, Mr. Bob stood up, and he said, let's get on with pulling those names. He says, I want to get in that Mr. Hartley's hardware store. I got something I want to get in there. Well, everybody laughed, because they did too, but they weren't going to say anything. But Mr. Bob said it, so now it was okay. So now they had to have somebody pull the names. So what they thought they would do is they would have the kids from town come up and take turns, and they would take maybe 10 minutes worth of pulling the tickets, and then the next child would come up, and they would pull the tickets for 10 minutes. Well, of course, you know, Mommy Piggy, she had to keep track of that too. Bless her heart, she was keeping track of what was, you know, what name was pulled out, and then she was keeping track of the kids, and she was keeping track of the numbers. Was it number 20 yet? Oh, goodness gracious sakes. I mean, she just, you know, wow. So, guess who got up first? Little itty bitty tiny Sadie Skunk got up first. You know, she's so little itty bitty tiny. You know, she only weighs 3 pounds. She finally gained that 3rd pound. Well, little Bad Wolf, he just smiled and smiled and he smiled because he thought, he just thinks that Sadie Skunk is the cutest little thing. And she fits right up inside his overall pocket. And when they climb the tree, you know, she can't climb the tree because she's just too little. So he always takes her up and he takes her out of his pocket and he puts her on the branch, you know, and makes sure that she's all settled, you know, because he goes all the way up to the top of the tree. You remember how come he goes to the top of the tree? Does anybody remember that? He goes to the top of the tree so he can look out and see if anybody's coming. And if somebody's coming and they don't know who it is, they get real quiet so that nobody can see them and hear them up on top of the tree. And meanwhile, the alligator's on the bottom branches, and he's doing the same thing. So, Little Bad Wolf can see far away if anybody's coming. And if he missed them, Little Bad Wolf is right there when they get there. So all the boys and girls are safe, and they're happy. So, Little Bad Wolf, with all of that being said, Little Bad Wolf thinks that little Sadie Skunk is just the cutest little thing ever. And she really is. And she's got blue eyes. Would you believe she's got blue eyes? Now, I thought all little skunks had black eyes. But she's got blue eyes. Don't know how, but she's got them. I see my little lighting chick laughing at that one. So, she gets up there and she pulls 10 names, and they called the names off. Oh my goodness gracious, there was Miss Gladys was called first, and would you believe Mr. Bob, because he's the one that spoke up, his name got called second. Can you imagine that? Oh my goodness gracious. Well, they just called and called. They called 10 whole names, and everybody was going into the store, and Mr. Hartley was helping the people, and Mrs. Hartley was helping the people, and they had their son, Mr. Hartley Jr., helping the people because it was getting kind of crowded. You put 10 people in there all at one time and talking and saying, I want this, but I want that. Well, I want this. You know, so Mr. Hartley says, okay. He says, one at a time, folks. He said, this store is going to be here for several more years. He said, just don't, you know, just take your time. No shouting, no need to. So everybody calmed down, and it was very nice. And I watched them come out of the store. Oh, my goodness gracious. One person had a push lawnmower. One lady had 2 vases that were so pretty, and they were by that Hull, Hull company. Oh, you can tell at a glance where they're from just by looking at them. One person had 1 rake, and one person had some soap to wash their clothes in. One person had a washboard because his wife didn't have a electric, good Lord, clothes washer. And so she had to take an old scrub board and a big old tub and fill it with water. Oh, so hard. And then she put the wash tub in, and she scrubbed. Well, she wore out that board, and she told him, she says, you better get me a new board because I'm not going to wash your clothes, and you're going to have dirty clothes to wear. Well, he didn't want to have dirty clothes to wear, so he made sure that when his name was called, he went and got that washboard. And you know what it was, boys and girls, and mommies and daddies and grandmommies and grandpuppies? It was an old-fashioned glass board. They're so pretty. They don't last because people got mad and broke them, or some kid ran into it and broke it. So then they couldn't wash clothes anymore, and they lost their pretty glass scrub board. But there's a few out there. GrandMommy has seen them. They're so pretty. Well, the first name was drawn, and that was going to go in the new bucket. And Mr. Hartley was standing beside the new bucket, and people had wondered what this other bucket was for. Well, Mr. Farmer Brown, before it started, of course, he explained to them what was going to happen, that they were going to draw 10 names, and those 10 people would go into the hardware store and get what they wanted, and that 11th name would be put in the new bucket. Oh boy, this is getting good. Woo-hoo. And Little Bad Wolf, he's going, oh, oh, oh. He just didn't know what to say. He was just getting so nervous. Oh my gosh, he didn't know what to, he didn't shut up, and he just went on and on. Oh. Mrs. Farmer Brown, she came over and she gave him a great big hug. And she says, now, child, she says, you calm yourself down. She didn't want anybody to hear her talking to him. She says, you calm yourself down, and you just sit back and you enjoy this. And if you want to go off somewhere and do some of the slides that we've put and the swings that we put out there, you just go right ahead, because you don't have anything to do until we get through with all these pieces of paper. And she smiled at him and she gave him a great big hug, and he starts crying. He says, oh, Mrs. Farmer Brown, Mama, he said, thank you very much. He says, that's so good. And she says, I know. She says, it'll be okay. GrandMommy gets that way. So, the first name was called. And the first name was Hobson. 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 Well, that's kind of a nice name. It's kind of an old-fashioned name. But it's a nice name, I think. So they put it into the smaller bucket. And Mr. Hartley, he's so funny. He twirled that bucket around with only one piece of paper in it. And in the meantime, Mr. Farmer Brown, he's got so much paper in his, he could barely get the handle to turn around. Oh my gosh, goodness gracious. Well, they did 10 more names. And all the people went in the hardware store, and they came out just in time for that next name to be called. And what was this name, you asked GrandMommy? This name was Babcock. Babcock Brown. Babcock Wolf. Well, I guess it has possibilities. I think, maybe. Well, this kept going on and kept going on, and people were standing there with their prizes from Mr. Hartley's hardware store, and other people were standing there smiling to beat 60 because their name had been called and put into the new bucket. Well, this was a long process, and I kind of got tired sitting there, and I asked Mrs. Farmer Brown, I said, please let me help you, because I'm getting kind of tired sitting there. And she says, oh, thank you, GrandMommy. She says, I can sure use your help. So we passed out ice cream and cake and tuna fish sandwiches and egg salad sandwiches. I tell you right now, it just made me hungry just looking at all that food. It was so good. And people were walking around, and Mr. Farmer Brown and the other store owners, they had put out great big buckets to throw your trash in. But you know, especially with the kids, not everybody was able to put their trash in the bucket. Some of the people just didn't really care. You know how that goes. And other people were very nice and put their trash in the buckets. So it got to be, now we started, I think it was, what was it, 9 o'clock in the morning, I think we started this. Isn't that right, Mrs. Piggy? And yes, I thought it was 9 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock already. That bucket has got about a third left in it. That's how many names we've pulled out so far. And the new bucket is about half full already, because, you know, it's a little smaller. Well, Mr. Farmer Brown, he got up and he announced, he says, well, folks, he said, this bucket's almost done. And he says, that bucket's almost full. He said, you think we're going to make it through to the end of the night? And Mr. Hartley had surprise for Mr. Farmer Brown. He went to the electric company and he told them what was going to happen. And they came out as a favor to Mr. Hartley, and they installed spotlights on Mr. Hartley's store and on the grocery store across the street. So they had lights looking down like this. I tell you right now, Mr. Farmer Brown says, now I know some of you people have brought chairs. He says, and I think that's a good idea. He said, so if you haven't brought your chair and sitting in it yet, he says, you might want to go and get some chairs. He said, I think there's some piled up over there on the other side of the hardware store. Well, he knew there was because he brought all of them in. He rented. He went down to the rental center and rented these chairs. What does that man not think of? He just thinks of everything. And you know, boys and girls, if you have problems and you want to try to think of a solution, you just can't think the very first thing and do it because it may not be the right solution. It may not solve anything. So you get together with some of your friends or your mamas and your daddies and you think very clearly, very carefully through your problem and you figure out what to do. You just don't figure out, hey, I'm going to go and run down the street, because that might not be what you're supposed to be doing. So you always think real carefully what you're going to do, okay? And that goes for everything that's happening all over the world. You got to think real careful what you're going to do. Okay, so it's getting 6 o'clock. Somebody said, hey, we need some pizza around here. And Mr. Farmer Brown just grinned and he said, Joe, is that you over there wanting pizza? Yep, that's Joe. Joe, what kind of pizza do you want? Well, Joe, thinking this was funny, he said, I want a pepperoni pizza with anchovies on it. And all the crowd just laughed and laughed and laughed because most of the people didn't even know what an anchovy was. Well, Joe had come from the city. He used to live in the big city of Tampa, and so he knew what an anchovy was. So Mr. Farmer Brown says, well, it just so happens, he said, that our grocery store across the street, Mr. Publix, is donating pizzas. They're donating pizzas. They bought a whole bunch of pizzas from Marco's Pizza, and you'll find them over in front of the store. Go help yourself for supper tonight. Oh my God. Can you get any better fun day? And I hope you noticed that the title of the story is I can't even say it. Today. Otherwise known as The Day. Yeah, that's an inside joke. So some of the people rushed over there to get their pizza, and some of the people, of course, waited until the crowd had gotten through. And they kept on calling names. Well, so far they had called, what was it now? Babcock. What was the first name? Oh my gosh. I knew I should have wrote these down. They had called several names by now. And got to find my notes. And it was getting late. And I mean, everybody was having a good time. They really were. They were having a really good time. There was free food. What's not to like that? And there was chairs to sit in. There was music to listen to. If you wanted to go dancing, you could, because Mr. Farmer Brown had a loudspeaker. And so if you were away over there dancing, you could still hear your name being called for Mr. Hartley's Hardware. Inside of Publix, they could hear their names. So he had it all, here again, he had it all planned out. He just didn't go with the first thing that he thought of. He thought it all the way through, and he had everything that you ever wanted to think about all planned out. Now that is good. That's very smart. So it was getting empty, and the hardware store was getting empty. I mean, there was hardly anything left in that hardware store. Mr. Hartley was getting kind of worried because he says, "Oh, I don't know." He says, "Mrs. Hartley, what are we going to do?" He says, "We've only got about 5 more things." And she says, "Not to worry, Mr. Hartley, dear." But she says, "I ordered some more things, and they're back in the back storeroom." She says, "I'll go get them right now." Well, she did. And she had some more rakes and some shovels. She had one tiny shipment of the Hull, Hull pottery. She had some nice things. Okay, she knows what to order. And so she brought them out just in case. Well, they got used because they had that many tickets left. So it was all over, and there was quite a few names in the new bucket. Well, now the little piggy's turn, or Little Bad Wolf was supposed to draw out his tickets, and he was afraid to. And he told Mama, Mrs. Brown, he says, "Mrs. Farmer Brown, Mama, I'm just too scared to draw out a name. I'm just so scared. I won't be able to say the name right, and I might hurt somebody's feelings, and I just don't know what to do." Because he was very shy, because for so many years he had lived by himself in that little grassy thingy-jiggy thing, odd thing looking thing by the tree before it blew down. And he had a lot of manners because he copied the boys and girls, but he was a little shy. He was a little shy. So he says, "Mama," he says, "can I ask Piggly Wiggly and Squiggly to draw out the tickets? You know how they like to show off, and you know how they like to play around." And so she says, "Well, I think that would be a good idea." She says, "You go get them right now," because she says, "Mr. Farmer Brown Daddy is about ready to announce this." So Mr. Farmer Brown started to say, I thought it was so sweet. He started to say, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we will have," and Mrs. Farmer Brown came over and she tugged at his sleeve and she says, "May I please make this announcement?" And he looked at her kind of funny and he said, "Okay, folks, you all know my wife. This is Mrs. Farmer Brown. Okay, Mrs. Farmer Brown, sweetheart, you go ahead and take over." Well, she got up to that microphone. This little woman wasn't scared of anything. She was such a neat lady. I tell you right now, she was a neat lady. So she got up on that microphone and she said, "All right, boys and girls and mommies and daddies and grandmommies and grandpuppies." And then she turned and looked at me and winked, because she knew that that's how I always start my stories. She was being a stinker. Well, she said, "We're going to kind of deviate from what we had planned." And Mr. Farmer Brown looked at her kind of funny. "Oh my gosh, what's going on now?" And she just smiled at him, and she didn't say a word. She said, "So the Little Bad Wolf would like the 3 little pigs to come up and draw the names for him." Well, everybody knew who Piggly Wiggly and Squiggly was. Even though they can't tell them apart, they knew who they were. Well, Mommy Piggy, she's back there helping Mrs. Farmer Brown with all the food. And she heard their names, and she says, "Oh my gosh, what did that happen? What did they do? Did they get in trouble? What did they do?" She comes running up to the bandstand, jumped up on the steps and says, "Mr. Farmer Brown, are they okay? Are they okay?" He said, "Relax, Mrs. Piggy." He says, "We're going to call them up to draw the names." He says, "They're just fine." Well, Mrs. Mama Piggy, you know how she likes to make shirts for everybody, for the boys, and they always are special shirts. I swear, I declare, I don't know where she finds the material, the fabric, to make these shirts. because Piggly's little yellow shirt had names written all over it. Oh my goodness gracious. Bobby and Joe and Clarence and Cookie and Muppet. Names all over that shirt. I see you laughing. Well, of course, Wiggly's shirt that was blue, and he had names all over his shirt. But the funny thing was, his names were dog names. Fido, Butch, dog names. Uh-oh. What did Squiggly's shirt have on it? Well, Mrs. Piggy had a choice. She either had a choice of girl names or cat names. Well, she couldn't pick girl names. Squiggly's a boy. Wiggly's a boy. Piggly's a boy. So she picked cat names. Squiggly saw the shirt when they were at home, you know, getting dressed, and he didn't know if he wanted to wear cat names or not. But he said, you know what? It's such a pretty shirt, and our mama worked so hard on these shirts, so I'm going to wear it anyway. I don't care if somebody makes fun of me for having cat names all over my shirt. And that's what he did. He wore it very proudly. Well, those boys got up on that stage, and they started pulling names out. Well, they could only pull out 3 names. I just lost my names again. They could only pull out 3 names. They wanted to pull out 4. Mr. Farmer Brown says, no, you pull out 3 names. Oh, my goodness gracious. The first name they pulled out was Cole, C-O-L-E. Now, GrandMommy thinks that's a pretty good name. It's a strong name. It's a nice-looking name when you write it out on a piece of paper. It's a pretty. It's a green. Cole is a green word. Don't ask what that means. I know one person who knows what that means, and she explained it to me. There's a great big word to call that. When you see a color, when you say a word, and if you see a color, there's a name for that. And GrandMommy has always done that. I don't know why. Don't know where it came from. Not every word, okay? But Cole is green. Learn something new every day. Well, Wiggly was up next, and he pulls out David. Oh, what a good, old-fashioned, firm, strong name is David. And who did... Everybody knows where the name David came from. Do I hear the answer? That's right, the Old Testament. David is a beautiful name, and there's been a lot of people named David over the years. And Mrs. Farmer Brown, she heard them, you know, even though she's still cleaning up and serving people, she could hear them, and she was smiling because she liked the name of David. She thought that was a pretty doggone good name. Okay, here comes Squiggly's turn. And he gets in there, and he reaches all around, and he digs down to the very bottom, and he pulls out a name. It was Isaiah. What a pretty name. And another Bible name. And another Old Testament Bible name. We're going to have to look up and see if Cole, C-O-L-E, is in the Bible. You know, that would be kind of funny. It would be 3 names. But right now, they got 2 names from the Bible. Well, that was pretty good. That was pretty good. So, they turned over the pieces of paper, and they said, okay, the first name was Cole, and that belongs to Mrs. Irene Waldrop. Is Mrs. Irene Waldrop here? Their hand went up in the middle of the crowd, and here comes Mrs. Irene Waldrop up to the steps. And Mr. Farmer Brown says, I want to thank you very much for suggesting the name of Cole. We think it's a nice name. We like it. Little Bad Wolf, what do you think of that name? And Little Bad Wolf says, I like that name. I'm happy. I can be Cole Wolf. I can be Cole Brown. Oh boy, This is going to be fun. Bless his heart, he was finally happy. He was finally relaxed. He wasn't nervous and he wasn't scared anymore. He was starting to enjoy this whole idea that he was going to have a name. Well, David was the next name called, right? He turns the piece of paper over, Mr. Farmer Brown, and he reads the name, and he reads it again, and he goes, H.L. Paget. H.L. I wonder, I know who that is. Hey, H.L., where are you at? Where are you at, Mr. Paget? Mr. Paget was standing in the back of the crowd because he was eating pizza. He was eating pizza. He liked his pizza. He says, I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming. So he came up, and Mr. Farmer Brown says, well, Mr. Paget, he says, we do appreciate that name of David. He said, that's a good, strong name. It's a good old name. He said, thank you very much. Little Bad Wolf, what do you say to Mr. Paget? And Little Bad Wolf looked at him, and he smiled, and he says, thank you very much, Mr. Paget. He says, I like that name, David. He says, I think that's pretty cool. And Mr. Paget says, okay, boy. He said, I'm glad that we could pick it for you. Well, now they looked at the last name, which was Isaiah. And they turned it over. Oh, my goodness gracious. Now, this is funny. This is funny. This doesn't happen very often. Okay? They called the lady's name, and it was Mrs. Letha Porter. She's related to Mr. Paget. Would you believe that? They're cousins. Who would know? And with all these people here, that two people that were related, their names got called. I mean, to tell you. Well, anyway, here she comes. And oh, she was so sweet and so pretty. She had big blue eyes and blonde little curly hair. Oh, she was so sweet and pretty. And Mr. Farmer Brown says, we do like that name. We're so glad that you suggested that name. And she goes over and she says, Little Bad Wolf, I think you're so sweet and so nice and so polite. Can I give you a hug? Well, Little Bad Wolf, he didn't know what to say about this. He didn't know this lady. Now, he knew that Mr. Farmer Brown knew this lady, but he didn't know this lady. Should he let her hug him? I mean, should he let her hug him? What should he do? Oh my gosh, what is he going to do? So he, like all little boys, he stood there and he goes like this. And so she gave him a big hug. Well, now it was time to figure out how are we going to put these names together. Are we going to say Isaiah Cole David? Are we going to say Cole David Isaiah? That doesn't sound too good. Are we going to say David Isaiah Cole? Oh. Now, David is 2 syllables. Isaiah is 3 syllables. And Cole is 1 syllable. And that is the proper way to name names. You go by how many syllables, so it blends in. It's so pretty. Okay? You notice I didn't say what color David was, and I didn't say what color Isaiah was, because it hasn't come to me. I don't think about the colors. But when I say Cole, I see green, just like that. So now, Little Bad Wolf's name is now officially David Isaiah Cole Brown. And Mr. Farmer Brown says, okay, folks, you know, tomorrow is Sunday. It's officially Valentine's Day on Sunday. He said, I think we've got a marathon that's being run right through the city of Tampa. He said, I think that we're going to go over and see the marathon race. He said, anybody that wants to come, he says, let's get a carpool and we'll all go over to Tampa and see the marathon race. He says, because I know somebody that's running in it. She's a lady, and she's going to run in her, that's the longest marathon that she's run in. It's the official length. and she's never running well. She's always running short ones. He says, so I'm going to go over there and support her after church. He said, so I will see everybody in church. And they started saying goodbye, and they started picking up all their trash, and I helped them, you know. And, of course, I was helping Mrs. Farmer Brown and GrandMommy Piggy because they had a lot to do. And there was no food left over, so they didn't have anything to pack. And Mrs. Piggy, being the sweet woman that she is, she'd already washed up all the pots and pans and the dishes and everything that they used. So it was an easy, quick cleanup and leave. And Mr. Farmer Brown, he already had hired the rental company to come and pick up the chairs, so they were doing their work, and everybody was working like a good town, like a good family should, and got cleaned up within an hour. That place was clean. I didn't know that it could happen that quick, but it did. And Little Bad Wolf was going around saying, I'm David Isaiah Cole Brown. And so then Wiggly says, what are you really going to be called? And Little Bad Wolf says, I don't know yet. I haven't decided. I don't know what to do. And Wiggly said, aw, Little Bad Wolf, we'll call you anything you want. We'll call you LBW. We'll call you Little Bad Wolf. We'll call you Woofy. How about that one? I like Woofy. And Little Bad Wolf says, you know, it's kind of growing on me. I thought it was kind of silly when I first heard it. But he says, Woofy's kind of growing on me. I kind of like that. And about that time, here comes Mrs. Farmer Brown and Mr. Farmer Brown. And they heard him. And they said, okay, if you want to be called Woofy, that's what we'll call you. But when you get 12 years old, you're going to start to be a teenager. Your voice is going to change. You're going to get taller. I don't think that we should call you Little Bad Wolf. And everybody laughed and laughed and laughed. And Little Bad Wolf says, yeah, I'm only 7 now. I've only got 5 more years to be called Little Bad Wolf. And boys and girls, mommies and daddies, and grandmommies and grandpuppies, this is a long story today, but we finally named Little Bad Wolf David Isaiah Cole Brown. How about that one? So, GrandMommy will see you Monday, if I don't forget, hopefully. And you know what to do. Hi. I have somebody that said hi, Mom. And you know what to do. I hope the little lighting chick is watching. Since GrandMommy, or Maman is watching, I hope the little lighting chick is watching too. Anyway, folks, share, comment, and like. Okay? And this is the 4th revision of the Little Bad Wolf's name. And with that, we'll say goodbye.